Okay, so let me do this is how we're gonna do this because we have quite a few people and we have a wonderful group of principals. And this is like the first conversation with principals throughout the state whose schools have been recognized. So I'm gonna actually explain the criteria that we used. But before I do that, what we'll do is after I explain the criteria and why we use that criteria, I'm also going to turn it over to Peggy Paterson. She'll say something, and then we'll start with the schools of excellence for Salt Lake. And the reason we're starting with Salt Lake is that they actually had the highest number of exemplary schools. And so then we'll do the schools of excellence first, and then the exemplary schools. And if you make notes for questions and look for patterns across strategies that you could actually apply in your schools would be really great. It would be helpful for us too. The next series will be high schools. So that in itself will be pretty fascinating to see high schools doing amazing work. And then we're working on kind of the middle schools. Most of you, I don't know how many of you ever taught in middle school, but I taught 10 years in South Central Los Angeles in a middle school. And I had the time of my life, but middle school kids are really interesting, as most of you know. So then we'll work on the middle schools. And then we're going to identify effective transitions between elementary and middle, and then middle and high school. And oftentimes it doesn't really fit in a feeder pattern. We found that out when we did visits to classrooms for Title III monitoring. So the question is, what does make effective transitions? One of the things that we actually did is we took the first ascent scholars who got 4-year scholarships to the Eccles Business School, and then we tracked their course taking patterns. And we discovered that if English learners, now remember, this group of students, and the data is amazing in relationship to the 5-year program and the cohorts that were sponsored by the Eccles Business School with 4 years. And their retention rate for graduation in 4 years is something like 99%. And each year there were 10 that were selected throughout the state. So when we started working on looking at course taking patterns for equitable access and what that looked like, we actually discovered that the students who were in the first ascent scholars and were English learners, or multilingual learners, I like to say, I prefer that, they became proficient in English before they left elementary school, usually by 5th grade. And then as a consequence, the courses that were open to them at the middle school were more rigorous, right? And so then when they got to high school, they ended up, taking another language. They took AP classes, they took concurrent courses. And so they ended up, so when you say early college coursework, you just can't think about high schools. I had this conversation with the assistant superintendent in Park City, and her whole thing was you have to really even look at kindergarten, right? So very, very early on, what are those language opportunities that kids have, and how do they develop that based on language acquisition, and what kind of safe, welcoming environments are created? So this is kind of the context for the criteria that we set based on previous work that we did with, some really amazing people. The other reason we pick this criteria is sometimes people get stuck, and it's nobody's fault, but it ends up being what we always think about and how we've always thought about things. So we actually decided on the criteria, which was an enrollment criteria of 400 students or more in elementary school. Now, the reason we picked 400 or more is that oftentimes elementary schools, especially the principals, have to think differently about how they allocate resources because of the increased enrollment, right? I visited this like amazing, actually, Dr. Donaldson and I visited this elementary school in Canyons, where I think their enrollment was something like 1,200. They had like, you know, the regular school, and then they had all these portables. And we saw some of the best instruction there and met this amazing principal. So, and the reason we're focusing on Utah is fairly obvious, I think. When people use examples from other states, which is fine, they don't really get us. You know, they don't really get Utah or the context. So we picked 400, and that's the reason we picked the enrollment number. We also picked high poverty, and what we meant by economically disadvantaged, it was 80% to 100% economically disadvantaged. The reason we picked this high of a high number is basically for two reasons. One is there have been lots of studies, and the famous one is 90-90-90, that shows the way in which schools create environments and conditions for learning mitigate those external factors, right? And Hattie says pretty much this similar thing. Talks about teacher high expectations. He talks about teacher collaborative efforts. He talks about, you know, engaging learning. So this meta-analysis of Hattie really shows that what happens in the schools and the connections with families makes a huge difference. So we picked 80 to 100% poverty. Because sometimes people think, unfortunately, oh, you know, those poor kids in their community, and, you know, kind of that. They kind of get stuck in that thinking. Okay, so we wanted to create a criteria that disabused people of those ideas. And then we wanted to identify elementary schools with at least 40% English learners, right? And again, the whole point is, how do you align and allocate resources in relationship to the actual percentage of students who are English learners, as well as their proficiency levels? Provo School District is one of the schools, districts that does one of the best jobs of this. They do the allocation based on the level of proficiency as a weighted per pupil allocation, and then grade all their funds. So there's no excuse for people to say, oh, I don't have enough Title III money. Then what we did is, you know, the way in which proficiency toward English proficiency, the growth goal is very personalized. And we use this really great example. So if you look at the accountability manual, you'll see that when a student enters and the level at which the student is proficient ends up calculating an individualized proficiency annual growth goal for that student. And the reason is, if you're a refugee student and you come in at the 9th grade, you know, that's very different than a kindergarten kid who comes in and their level is a level 1. And it's different in a high school when the student is a level 1 and they come in at 9th grade or 10th grade or whatever, right? So we did the 40 to 60% annual growth goal. Now, of that criteria, we actually had 6 districts, so 6 LEAs, and a total of 19 schools. Now, we wanted to make a certain distinction, and that was based on the data that we used from the First Ascent scholars, which was, remember, if students become proficient, which is a 5.0 composite on the WIDA score, before they leave elementary, they are actually more likely to have success in post-secondary education. It's not only about equitable access to early college coursework, but it's also achievement of early college coursework. And when we talked about that readiness, You know, it's AP classes, IB classes, concurrent classes, CTE classes for career and college readiness. So we took that criteria. And we decided, well, if we have this criteria, let's look at all the schools, the elementary schools, whose students who are English learners have reached at least their student population, 10% or more of the students, of the multilingual learners, have actually reached proficiency. So that's the category for the exemplary schools. The reason we picked 10% is the state average is 6%. So I'm not going to say anything about that. So that's one thing we have to really, really work on. And that's why elementary schools, you know, are so valuable in the fact that we're learning together, you know, as a huge cohort of leaders and teachers and, you know, colleagues at USBE to better understand what really works in our schools in Utah. Okay, so that's the criteria. So what we're going to start with is Peggy Paterson will say a few words about the role of the district in the way in which they provide support, right? So that's really important. Then we'll talk with the principals, and I'll say the principal, I'll say the school, right? And then the principal will introduce herself or himself, and then, you know, talk about what they actually did. So we'll start with the schools of excellence, and then we'll go to the exemplary schools. And I'll say the name of the school. We'll do kind of a reverse alphabet kind of thing. And then they'll talk a little bit about it. So make sure that you take notes if you have any questions. Look for patterns, and then we'll have a conversation after. So we're going to start with Peggy Paterson. And so Peggy, make sure you tell us like what your role is in Salt Lake.
Okay, thank you so much, Christelle and everyone at USBE for making this award possible. I'm at home and they're rolling the garbage cans down the street. So if you hear some background noise, I do apologize. But at any rate, again, thank you so much. And in these uncertain times, this was such a great award to be given to really focus on some of the great things that we are doing rather than all the struggles. So, you know, as you know, it is what is done at the classroom level is really where the magic is taking place. So I see, oh, I'm sorry, I'm Peggy Paterson, and I'm the Literacy and ALS Director for Salt Lake City School District. So there you go. Okay. So I'll get back into where the magic happens is at the classroom level. And the classroom level needs to be supported by incredible administrators. And you're going to hear from some of the Salt Lake City School District, my colleagues that I'm just thrilled to work with, and I learn from them every day. What I see my role as a district level person is to provide that support and that infrastructure so that schools can do the work that they need to do. So I've worked really hard the past 3 years. I gained the ALS department about 3 years ago so that we could kind of mingle them with literacy. And some of the things that we have done is tried to create a really coherent, cohesive, collaborative, yet responsive support system so that schools can make the decisions they need to based upon the communities they have. Salt Lake City School District is very diverse. We have over 88 languages spoken in our district, with about 24% of the population being multi-language learners and multilingual learners, excuse me. And the schools that are being acknowledged today are very diverse as well. Some have up to 22 languages spoken, where one may be more predominant in one language. So they're also dealing with very different issues, and they need to be able to make decisions for their community. That makes sense. So some of the things that we've done at the district level, I work really closely with all content area supervisors so that we do provide support for English language learners in the content area, not just in English language development. So that we focused very heavily on academic language. We took all of our academic coaches to some conferences that help them with that. What is the academic language in your discipline? Because we know that students need to be able to access that. In elementary school, what we did 2 years ago was try to really align the curriculum between literacy and ELD to help make those connections for students. So during English language arts, the focus was more on the components of English language arts, and then supplementing that with English language development with a lens on language acquisition. I think it did two things. It made a coherent system for students, but it also really helped teachers understand the differences between English language arts and language acquisition so that they were able to really give a comprehensive, coherent experience for those students. We've also really relied on our data. So schools are using their data in ways that I think we hadn't before. We're sharing the data with students so that they see where they are in relations to the WIDA, so that they know where they need to be putting their efforts. So teachers are using that data also to make responsive groups, not just based upon this is a level 1 student, but given that level 1 student, where is it within that in speaking, reading, listening, and writing that they need some extra work. So those are just a couple of the things that we've done at the district level. And I just want to reiterate, it's what happens in these classrooms with a well-supported teacher where the magic is going to occur. So thanks so much again for this wonderful recognition. And I'm excited to learn from everyone today.
Thank you so much, Peggy. So now we're going to hear from the schools, the principals at the schools of excellence, and we'll start with Meadowlark. So make sure you say your name so we know who you are. Meadowlark.
I'm sorry, I have no power and I'm trying to get someone to help me with that. I'm Maggie Cummings and I'm the principal at Meadowlark. Thank you. And I'm a little intimidated by being the first one. I'm going to try to be as brief as possible. I am a very experienced secondary person, and last year was my very first year working in an elementary. I was a district level administrator and worked across all grades, but I did not have elementary experience. I walked into a school that was in its 8th year of turnaround focus, and I listened very carefully to the discussions around the school improvement plan. One area that 2 things became very apparent. One is that our teachers had an enormous amount of experience and education across the subject areas, as well as more than 70% of our teachers were ESL endorsed. And the second thing is they had a lot of concern about professional development. So within our school improvement plan, one of the things that we focused on was targeted school improvement, targeted by grade level. And everything that we did for our working on our ELD program was targeted to our PLCs. So the enormous support that we got from Peggy and her office with the new Wonders curriculum and how to use that Wonders curriculum and how to frame our time so that the language arts curriculum and the ELD instruction were working together. That was a huge benefit. The second benefit is that we had a tremendous coach, Michelle Dahl, who focused her work, her professional development, her support for teachers at the grade level. So it wasn't, a stand and deliver to everyone in the building. It was for 3rd grade, this is what you might consider doing for 4th grade. The third thing is that we spent a lot of time honoring the home language. So in this school, sometimes I hear we have 27 languages, sometimes I hear 26, and sometimes I hear 22. We have a lot of different languages in our school, but we deliberately talked about the importance of speaking your home language at home, learning how to read and write your home language at home. That was an important thing for students to have. It's an asset that they bring to school. And there was a very deliberate attention paid to that with library books, everything. But then when you come to school, we want to help you learn English. And that helped to frame for our families the fact that we respected their language and their home and their culture, and that we are not usurping, we're not taking over with English. And then the last thing is that we noticed that our speaking and writing were the two areas where we were most lacking, our students were most lacking. And so we very deliberately, especially my assistant principal and I, thought about how we have daily conversations with our students, repeating back what they say to us, giving them a sentence frame. When we ask them a question, and if they're not able to answer the question, we provide a sentence frame in which they might answer our questions. And then talking kind of informally with teachers about how to do that same thing. I wanted to add one more thing, because you mentioned two things. You mentioned about the transition, and then you also mentioned about the differences. So I was an administrator at Midvale Middle School, which was we had approximately 60% of our students at the time were Spanish speakers. And a huge difference at Meadowlark from Midvale, other than the age, is that at Midvale, you can spend the entire day only speaking Spanish. At Meadowlark, because we have so many different languages, a child had to learn English in order to communicate with their peers. And it's something to think about when you're thinking about how fast you can move students. I think it was a definite benefit that we had. The second thing is, we addressed with our 5th and 6th graders the importance of exiting out of ELD, so that you have the opportunity in middle school to take those fun elective classes. And that provided some motivation for them. I'm sorry I've taken so long. I'll be quiet now.
No, you don't. Okay, so you don't need to apologize. We have lots of time and we're learning. I'm keeping notes too. And then at the end, I'll try to connect the research related to the things that the principals are saying. I already have a list of all the research that you're already using and you're implementing. So thanks, Maggie. And that you were a middle school and secondary person. As soon as COVID is over, and I'm an old lady. So as soon as I'm vaccinated, I'm coming to see you. Okay, so let's talk to Mary W. Jackson.
Hello, I'm Tracy Shellstrom. I'm the principal at Mary W. Jackson. And this is my second year. Like Maggie, last year was my first. And I walked into structures that were in place and great planning around working with our EL learners. We are a dual language immersion school. Last year, we were not adhering to the state model, but we still did a good job, in my opinion. First and foremost, building relationships and establishing a positive, safe climate have been essential. And then really infusing culture into our teaching. Other pieces include, we did a lot of test-taking strategy, teaching up front for kids. And then I'm gonna have Katie Hicks, my EL supervisor / coordinator, speak to the rest of the things that we've been doing since she's been here longer than me.
Thanks, Tracy.
Go ahead, Katie.
Thank you. My name is Katie Hicks. I teach at Jackson and I have been there for several years. Last year, I was ELD teacher for K through 6. And some of the strategies I think that worked really well for our school was that we used the Wonders ELD curriculum provided by the district, and we used a pre-teaching approach. I would teach it to my students in the classroom the week before they were to see it in their general education room. And feedback we received from the teachers was that the students were more prepared for the stories they were hearing and the questions that needed to be answered. We had a lot of students who typically would not share in class starting to raise hands. It was even especially helpful to our special ed students who were also EL learners, that they were raising their hands and contributing more in class because they felt more prepared. Part of my role in teaching the ELD curriculum provided by Wonders was going through the vocabulary and providing the background knowledge. We were able to accommodate our schedule at school to do a 45-minute class with all of our EL students 5 days a week. We use the materials provided by the district, so the Wonders books were very helpful. The unit assessments were ones that we used in school, and I used that to drive my instruction in the classroom when I could see on the assessment where they were falling short, possibly vocabulary, comprehension, things like that. As Tracy said, the value of testing was something we really drove into these students. We all teach in classrooms and see it every day that students get kind of drowned out in the testing and they start to kind of not care. So we really wanted to instill the value of it, show people what you know. These people that see these test results aren't in the room with you every day. They don't get to see what I see every day in my classroom with you. And so this was an opportunity for showing them that. We used the weekly assessments and the unit assessments to build their confidence because they were always showing some improvement. And a lot of students found it as a competition for themselves. Oh, I got a 70 last time. This time I got a 75. I did much better. And it kept them motivated to keep learning. I shared their data from the previous year's WIDA scores with my students, especially the upper grade ones. And we had pretty frank discussions about it when I would notice that, you know, this test score doesn't exactly reflect what I see in the classroom. So, you know, this year we really want to show what we're doing. And also I shared their growth goals with them. This is what the district has, you know, presented to us as the progress you should make. And I know you can do it. And I want you to blow it out of the water. And for many of them, they did. And I was very impressed with the growth a lot of our students showed, as evident by the Excellence Award we received. And as Tracy said, the testing strategies we really hit hard. Probably in November, we are fortunate enough to be a one-to-one school with technology. And I had the students start doing a weekly assessment of reading a passage, writing about it, and going back and listening to themselves. Because as Maggie was saying in her school, where writing and speaking were the low points, those were ours as well. And I think having them work with the technology and go back and listen to themselves, because a lot of students just record it and submit it. And I think going back and listening really made a difference because they could tell, oh, I wasn't speaking loud enough, or you couldn't understand me clearly. And so we could work on those skills. And every week I would listen to those recordings from all my students and provide them feedback. Oh, this didn't sound loud enough. So it was really something that we took advantage of to be able to teach them those testing skills. We had daily comprehension in class provided by the Wonders material. And towards more the testing window, we started looking at the practice test available through the WIDA testing site and reviewing that with them. So I think those were some strategies that really benefited us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katie. So I just added another huge list of research that you're actually using, and have seen some really interesting patterns so far. So Tracy, thank you, and Katie, thank you. And again, you know, my intention is to visit and hang out in your classrooms with you. So thanks so much.
You are welcome.
Okay, so now we're going to the exemplary schools. And remember the distinction in the exemplary school is that those schools are recognized besides the other schools of excellence based on the criteria. 10% or more of their students this year became proficient, right? Which actually means, you know, they were a 5.0 composite score. And I'll just say one thing in relationship to a pattern that's pretty obvious, especially those who know language acquisition. Speaking and writing, right, are expressive language skills. They are very different than listening and reading. So all of you who are here, think about that kind of analysis in relationship to what our colleagues have already said. In particular, Katie, everybody else as well. Okay, so now we're going to hear from one of my very old, she's not old, I'm old, friends, Dr. Chelsea Maloof, who is the principal at Mountain View, one of my absolute favorite schools because we started the El Sistema music program there. And if you don't know about El Sistema, Um, you know, if you go to the Los Angeles Philharmonic, you'll actually see the conductor of the youth orchestra that he started in Venezuela, based on a program that starts in kindergarten with 1 year of theory, music theory, and 1 year of violin consistently for 4 hours a week. So, and I'll actually send a link out so you can actually see the students and the video that we made for Promising Practices. Okay, so Chelsea, take it away.
Thank you. It is good to see you, Christelle. Thank you for being here. I was the assistant principal at Mountain View for 4 years, and I am now the principal. So different from my previous colleagues, I have been there for a little bit longer and seen some of the changes that we had gone through as a school. Prior to being an administrator, I was a literacy coach for our district. So literacy is definitely my baby. And one thing that I had noticed is that my staff is, I mean, across the years, I have very low turnover for a Title I school. We are also a DLI school. And my staff competency is incredibly high. Yet we weren't moving our kids according to the WIDA. And so we were seeing growth in other areas, but not here. And it was something that was very perplexing to me. So in the spring of 2019, I attended an administrators meeting that Peggy held, and she shared with us some different data that really got down to the individual skill level. And what I noticed for our school was that phonics and phonemic awareness were low every grade. So we are a pre-K through 5 school. Even for our 5th graders who weren't moving those levels, that was an area that really stood out as holding students back. So I went back to school. I dug in a lot deeper. I started looking at individual kids. I started comparing different assessments that we do. I spent a lot of time over the summer doing it. And then I pulled in one of my 1st grade teachers who is, she's a teacher leader in our building, particularly in language arts. And I said, would you be willing to do professional development with me at the start of the school year? So we met with Peggy again and designed professional development. And knowing my staff the way that I do, I know that they do respond to data. So we did a day-long training before the year started. I spent the first probably about an hour and a half really digging into the data. But I mean, we looked at a grade level, but as a whole school, because I wanted them to see how important it was. And then we did some whole group things with just really getting deep with phonics, phonemic awareness, word study. And then we broke the staff into 2 sections. So we looked at our K2 students, and those teachers and assistants went with my 1st grade teacher. And then I met with the 3rd through 5th grade teachers. And we went through research-based strategies of what that would look like, what would be effective for upper grade students who just aren't moving. And my Spanish side DLI teachers also looked at what was happening with early Spanish skills also. And we just committed as a staff. I talk with my staff. This was something that I learned from my predecessor of there are things that I'm going to be tight with and things that I'm going to be loose with. And this was a tight one. Everyone was going to really focus on this. We were going to give it the year and see. At that time, district-wide, we also experienced a shift with our language instruction where we were given some more autonomy at the school level to make some decisions of how we instruct the students. We used to do all of the level 1s would go with one teacher, and all the level 2s would go with another teacher. So we were all doing language instruction at the same time. I took that back to grade levels, and we talked about what made the most sense at the grade level. Do you want to continue doing that or work with your kids? And all but one grade level chose to keep their own students, to work with our Reading Program as Wonders and the ELD materials that came with that. And then also a program called Hegarty, which we used in K2. That's they do a whole class lesson with that. And I think that was a big shift for the teachers because they took ownership of language development. I think prior to this, they would have said that they took ownership of the language development components. But I mean, even now that they're doing it differently, they realize, oh, I don't think that I was as much. So there was a real commitment. After that professional development, we focused on this in our PLCs, in classroom observations that I did. But I think also because knowing my staff and their high school skill level, when I said this is something that's really tight, I also said, but I'm going to be loose about how it's done. Like, these are the things that I want, but I also want you to go out, and if these things that I shared with you, I mean, they're just a starting point. So they dug in, they found things. They actually found the Hegarty work, and then I talked with other administrators and literacy coaches. But it really became our focus for the year. And, you know, my lower grade teachers were already good at it. I think they committed more time and allowed themselves the time to do it, knowing how important it was. I think that maybe they had gone through a little bit more quickly. But my upper grade teachers, I think that a lot of times upper grade teachers don't realize how important it is, or they make assumptions that students already know it when they don't. And that's where the data was really important in looking at an individual student level, because they were able, and for some of our students, it was just that they were missing one little piece that they really needed to practice to be able to move on. It was just like the little rock in their shoe that was keeping them from being able to run. So I said before in a board meeting, I feel like I went to my staff with a snowball and I said, here we go. And they created a beautiful snowman out of it. So I think it was a combination of data, of research, of strategy instruction, and then also on my end, there was trust and acknowledging the competencies and capacities in my building, and then really celebrating those.
Thanks. Thanks, Chelsea. It's great to see you again. I'm glad you're where you are.
Me too.
Chelsea and I knew each other when I was in Salt Lake, and I was a director of professional development and work with coaches. So we have a long history together. So it's wonderful to see you, Chelsea.
You too. It's a beautiful history. I love it.
Okay, so now we're going to go to Liberty and the principal there. Now remember, these 5 schools, there are 3 other schools in other districts that are exemplary. But Salt Lake has, that's why we started with Salt Lake. They have 5 schools that are exemplary, which again means, they ended up before the kids graduated and before they moved on to middle school, they have at least 10% or more of their students becoming English proficient as identified on the WIDA. So now we're going to go to Liberty.
Hi, everybody. My name is JaNeal Rodriguez. I'm the principal at Liberty. Nice to meet. I've heard many of your names and that's fine. Nice to put faces with names. So at Liberty, we do everything around purpose, and purpose is driven by our data, the district goals, and then of course with our multilanguage learners, our TSSA assignment that we received 2 years ago. Some things about Liberty is we have around 402 students. Well, last year we did. 55% of them were multi-language learners. We have 19 languages, 100% free and breakfast at our school. We're located just off of State Street and 13th South, so you can kind of imagine location, what we have going on there. This is my 5th year with my current staff. And like Chelsea mentioned, we do not have a high turnover. If teachers do leave, they leave because they receive promotions or advanced job opportunities. Otherwise, they stay around for a long time. And our RETA scores were really stagnant for years, and we had very little growth or students testing out of it. And so it was really a quandary of what was going on. And so when we were asked to kind of reflect and see hindsight, what had we changed or focused on in order to receive this amazing award. This is our second award in 2 years. So we're looking for a third one this coming year. If you think of one, that'd be great. Tell my staff we'll create one if we don't earn one. But it comes down to 3 things. It's alignment, support, and teacher owned. So alignment meaning that our master schedule was with dedicated time for ELD instruction, aligned to our TSSA goal, which is also part of with the district goal. And then the new curriculum for English language development class was tied to our tier 1 curriculum. So by doing those things helped, and then with the support behind that, so the change that we had, our English language arts coach was also now our ELD coach. So that having one person that had the specialty also helped. During PLCs, data dyes were used to disaggregate data for our multilanguage learners. So whatever data we're looking at, we would always use that lens, how our multilanguage learners doing. And then also we coordinated our professional development during PLC. So it was grade level specific. And then our literacy coach would bring in specialists that would help guide that professional development. So it was done at a very micro level. Also, our ALS coordinator has been our ALS coordinator for over 10 years, and she has been a gen ed teacher, a science teacher, an ELD teacher, and is currently one of our counselors. So her historical knowledge was able to help drive some of those decisions when we're setting up classes and how they're assigned to their teachers as far as during ELD. That was very helpful. And then the teachers really did own it this year. In the past, it's been out of compliance, and here's the curriculum you use, and they didn't love it. So they kind of like, and also they were dividing kids up amongst 2 grade levels because we had to have a certain number. And so we were organizing it grade bands. And so they really didn't have their own kids during ELD. So having them in their own homerooms was super powerful. So the teachers really did own their own kids, or sometimes they did share part of the time last year with their grade level, but they were still able to coordinate those efforts. They also found new purpose. They really like, okay, these are my kids. They're still my kids. I need to own their data. And so they found a new purpose, and they had a new determination. They were really driven during that time for ELD to really make it meaningful, not just to fulfill an obligation of compliance. We tied our engagement strategies through Kagan. So my staff, many of my staff had gone to a week-long training the summer before for Kagan strategies. And then we would implement them during faculty meetings, teach it to our teachers, and they would use them in the classroom and keep monitoring those. And so engagement strategies were a key factor to getting more kids talking and being active and participating. And then we let teachers do what they're trained for. They're professionals. And oftentimes we hold hands too much, or we don't let them really be in control or guide that direction. And so they are professionals, and giving them that power, they really stepped up to the plate and were able to perform. And so I honestly think that the change really came from the grassroots efforts of letting teachers have their kids, work with their kids, and just do what they know to do, and then support them as we noticed things were whole. So it was a work in progress.
Thank you so much, JaNeal. Really wonderful. I'm excited to visit Liberty too. So I'm making a list. So if you see me show up, you know who I am.
I would love to meet you in person for sure.
Okay, great. Now we're going to hear from Escalante.
Good morning. My name is Cody Colvin. I am the assistant principal at Escalante, and Haloti is the principal here. Both of us started about, so this is my third year, and Haloti started a few months before me. So we're not new, but we haven't been here a long time. And something really exciting about this award is that 2 years ago, when Haloti and I first started, we were not only deemed as a TSI school for our MLLs, but also based on our score in the 20-something% reaching growth, we were deemed more of a focus school to receive extra supports by our district. And through our partnership with the Utah Education Policy Center, we've been able to really kind of strategically target our professional learning and build our capacity around supporting our MLLs. And so it's been quite incredible to watch a staff move their kiddos roughly 30% in growth within 2 years. And now moving up from critical, deemed by the state from WIDA, to exemplary feels very good. And something also really exciting about the Escalante staff and community is that we are looking to continue to grow, and the teachers here are not going to be comfortable just leaving it at that, because even though we're now in the 50-something% of students and 10%, we know there's still a lot of opportunity to grow. Like many of my colleagues have said, we've done many of those things, being really intentional, honoring individuals' learning needs based on grade level. The staff in partnership with UEPC did deem wanting to grow their capacity in supporting our MLLs. So that has been a big focus. Something really incredible last year when we co-created our PLC protocol, we created a box at the top where we identified our target students. So we had them on the forefront in every PLC meeting as we were planning, so we could think, what do these kiddos need? When I'm developing my math and my literacy lessons, how can I think of them in mind? How can I provide those scaffolds for them throughout all curricular areas, in addition to those targeted language blocks that we had? And teachers really not only took greater accountability of building their capacity to support their MLLs, also building a greater collective whole as a school and owning all kids as our own. But most importantly, you know, the work was done in large part by the incredible teachers here. And I have two teacher leaders that I would love to highlight and each share for a minute. Charlotte Corzo has now moved from 3rd grade to 2nd grade, and I've asked her to share some of the things that she's been doing with her kiddos, as it relates to supporting their language acquisition. And then Tilly Uribe is a kindergarten teacher at Escalante Elementary. So I'd like to pass the time over to Charlotte.
Thanks, Cody.
Hi again, my name is Charlotte, and there are so many things that I've been learning with having Cody and Haloti be my administrating leaders. I have really been able to evaluate my bias, and I'm doing that all the time. That is never going to end, where I'm going to continue thinking about how the parents care. And I feel like a lot of our professional developments help the teachers reevaluate their bias and thinking about how the parents are feeling about their children. And I think that that is something very important to always keep in mind, because we do need to make a paradigm shift where we're capitalizing on our families and their culture. This year, I have about 9 languages in my room. That's going to be a whole new conversation since we've been teaching so differently this year. But throughout the years, I've never had that many different languages, but I have always had probably at least 3 every year. And the growth that we've made this past little while, the past 2 years with Cody's help, is mostly because of the way we've been structuring these opportunities that he's put before us. And I feel like it does start with those school goals, our SMART goals and our achievement gap goals. And then it goes to our team, it goes to the admin with me, with how I set my goals with my ECAP. That's going to make a big difference with me pushing and reaching my own personal goals as a teacher. I evaluate my own structure, how I am with the students, and then I look at the return. So I'm continually looking at those WIDA scores. Sounds like all of these other schools are doing the same thing where I'm using the WIDA. We've been doing the Kagan structures. That's something new for me and I love it. And you know, we've been having the Wonders ELD program, which is also new to me. And I've really been pushing writing and conversations in my classroom where they're using that text and writing and having conversations as much or more than actually reading the text with my focuses every week. Thanks.
Thanks, Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Tilly Uribe, and as Cody mentioned, I'm teaching kinder, but I did teach first grade for 23 years. So I have lots of experience in the lower grades, and I've been at Escalante since it opened. So I have a long history with our community and our students here. So it's been interesting to me to watch the shift in the growth in our students and our families. And in the last couple of years since Haloti and Cody have been here, our faculty has really come together with some cohesiveness and some like-minded goals and areas that we knew we needed to focus on to help build our community and our students' capacities. So one huge thing that we did in the lower grades, in the K and 1 grade, is a lot of us attended the Kagan training over the summer, as was mentioned earlier, and we learned so much about working with our kids in cooperative teams and partners and groups, and that really just helps get them speaking and talking and utilizing the language. And when I first started last year, I went into Cody's office and like, there is no way my kindergartners are going to master these structures. And a few months in, we were rolling, and I have never had such good conversation in my classroom. It was amazing. So that was really beneficial for our MLLs. Cody mentioned our PLC template, and that really highlighted areas where we were lacking or really needed to focus to help move our students along. And we could discuss as a grade level what our focus needed to be language-wise. And we could look a little deeper at our students and the gaps that we had and focus specifically on those. We also owned our own students for ELD time, and we didn't send them out into the allotted 15 in this group and 20 in this group. And we just owned our own students and worked really hard at making sure that we were meeting not only the ELA requirements, but also our ELD requirements with our students in our classes. Another component that I think was extremely beneficial to moving our students along, most of our faculty participated in home visits to our families, where we would go and spend 30 to 45 minutes at the home with the family, just talking about their hopes and their dreams for their students, getting to know their family, what was important to them, and where they're coming from, and learning about their cultures. And that was super beneficial to know where we could meet our students and help move them along, and our families, because as we're teaching the students, we're also teaching the families, and the families are teaching us. So just building that relationship was really beneficial in moving us along. And that's what I have to say.
Thanks. So do you do Tilly or Mathilda?
I usually go by Tilly.
Tilly, okay. So thanks Tilly and Charlotte and Cody. Again, you're on my list, so when I show up, don't be surprised. Thanks so much. Okay, now Edison and then we'll have Backman. So Edison.
Hi, I'm Sue Dom. I'm the principal at Edison Elementary. We speak 11 languages at our school. I have 64% MLL learners, and we are 100% poverty. For us, we could probably just echo everything that's been said. So much of it is a part of us and what we do in our culture. A big piece of Edison are systems of accountability. So we have put in a really strong, kind of efficient systems network so that we make sure that we are addressing the needs that we see. We have PLCs. We work in 4-week cycles that our PLCs run on. We have a PLC for reading, math, writing, and for our ELD, for our English language learners. So we spend that time really looking heavily at data. We look at data, we look at kids who are getting it, kids who aren't. What do we do, and how do we really address and drill down and become really specific? These are done in grade level teams. At Edison, we do have strong tier 1 instruction. We work really hard with professional development to make sure that we are hitting those key pieces for our language learners, to make sure that we have learning intentions and success criteria, and that we are really looking at what do kiddos need in tier 1. But we've also developed a school-wide intervention system. So all kids go and have interventions for 30 minutes every single day. So kiddos, based on data, we look at their data and what they need, can either go to a phonics, which we use Aspire. They go to Next Steps. We use Read Naturally. We have comprehension. We have writing. This time is when we do our gifted, our ELP time. So everybody is moving for that 30 minutes a day to really the structures that they need, which is really nice for them. We have, last year, we looked at data and realized that we needed to really boost up our phonics and phonemic awareness pieces. So we implemented a strong phonics program, as well as continuing our Heggerty. We know that we really need strong phonemic awareness in those early grades, and even our older kiddos are missing some of that. So working on that. We implemented last year dyad reading. It's a little tough this year in a virtual environment. Some of my teachers are doing it and doing it well, but we all made a school-wide goal to do dyad reading. On our WIDA, our teachers being able to use that Wonders and have that connection to be able to connect it with our language arts. Many of our teachers last year, they're just so collaborative, and it's a team effort. And they realized that some of our lower WIDAs, 1 and 2s, they needed that strong, a different kind of language. So as grade level teams, they would split their kids. And during that 45 minutes, they shared students and they shared resources and really grew their kids in those unique settings, and then brought them back together. Our students as well, we had them practicing speaking into a computer. It's hard. It's really, really hard. This year, it's kind of a gift. I mean, here we are in pandemic and we're on Zoom, and they're recording their things back to teachers in Seesaw. So we're kind of excited for this part, but last year it's really hard, and putting a headset on and having them speaking and having them look at a picture and respond to a prompt and really get comfortable with their own voice and who they are. So we took that time to have them do that and had them speak in front of others. We also have a laser focus on data. Data for us is key. We use Hattie's effect sizes, and so we figure effect sizes for the work we do. And we're looking at 0.6 effect size for us, so that we can, so we're always looking at the data and seeing who is making that 0.6 and who isn't, and what do we do. So we're focusing on growth. Our big focus as a school is reading and writing, is that proficiency. And one of the things we keep coming back to as a faculty is we become what we pay attention to. And so as JaNeal talks about, it's that focus, but we realize that what we pay attention to is what will become. And so we're really always putting at the forefront our reading and writing practices and making sure that all students have the ability to feel successful in that. So that's Edison. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. I really appreciate that. At the end, you sound like, kind of a Buddhist philosopher. It's like what we pay attention to, we become. And someone else said something really beautiful in relationship to being reflective on their own biases. So we all have preferences, but in schools, the whole point is, who are the students as individuals really, and how do I know, right? So it's all about that, that relationship piece. So Sue, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Christelle?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to ask you what the other phonics curriculum besides Heggerty that she's using.
Okay, so let me just say that we're holding all those questions until the end. We have one more school.
Okay,
We have one
got
more
it.
school. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brooke. Nice to see you, Brooke. Okay, so now we're at Backman. I know Heather in many capacities, so I'm not going to say much about that. So I'm going to let her take it away, and then we'll open to questions, and then I'll summarize patterns. So it'll be like questions, patterns based on research, and then we'll say goodbye to everybody. Okay, Heather.
All right, thank you. My name's Heather Newell. I'm the principal at Backman Elementary. This is my 7th year at Backman. So I think of all of the principals here, I've been in my school the longest. And unlike a lot of my colleagues, I have a lot of staff turnover, which is a blessing and a curse. And so what I've really needed to do is build in the culture of the school, English language development and supporting our multilingual learners. So when people come in to Backman, it's just what we do. And I think that sustainability piece is what we're all working for, so that it starts to be part of the fabric of what we do. Something unique about Salt Lake District that people may not know is about 15 years ago, there was an OCR complaint, and we were mandated to do 45 minutes of English language development every day. And I was a teacher then at Franklin and was like, this is ridiculous. And I think we all kind of fought it, and we didn't understand the purpose of it. It was this thing that we were forced to do. And over the years, we started to realize that, like, hey, so this isn't going away, and now we need to do something about it. And I think the district became more skilled in knowing how to support us. In the beginning, it was just kind of like, go figure it out. And we didn't do a very good job for a really long time. But once we started bringing in curriculum, we started doing professional development, we started figuring it out, we started to understand WIDA more, then it started to become more a part of what we do and a more part of our culture. And then last year they said, you can do it in different ways. And so that was kind of an interesting shift, and I'm curious to see what it will look like. And obviously for all of these schools, we did well with not having to be under there were very strict parameters that we had to go by in order to be in compliance. So again, it's a blessing and a curse. I think it really made us do good work in the end. And my teachers that really stuck with the things that they had done and learned before had the most growth in WIDA last year. So that was really interesting. So we have 56% of our students are multilingual learners, and in 2018, 68% were. So I started to realize that it's not, our population is shifting a little, but not that much, but it's actually because we become better at exiting students. And we realize the importance of, if they're not out by 5th grade, then they've got an uphill climb. And so my 3rd grade teachers are like, they've got to be out by 3rd. And then my 4th and 5th catch the rest. But the assessment gets harder in 6th grade, and it's a lot harder to pass, and then they go to middle school and that shuffle is really different. So we just really have that focus in trying to get our students proficient as quickly as possible, and really kind of working on that, like this, what language production, like we have to be talking all the time. We have to be talking, and even now, like in Zoom, I'm like, you don't have to hear kids talk for them to talk. Like, just put them all on mute and let them say your sentence frame. Like, they just need to be talking all the time. And I think that teachers are a little bit stifled by that. I'm like, or you turn them all at once and you hear the chaos and then you turn them off. Like, that's the beauty of Zoom. So I think as we're kind of moving into this new world, like, how are we supporting our kids in really different ways? And I think this, like, bridging this technology gap is huge. And I think another big thing that we worked on was, like, we started to teach the kids about the test. Like, why are you taking it? Why is this important? It's really important that you get out by the time you're in 5th grade, because that means you have more access to everything in secondary. And also, like, this is how you use a screen reader. This is how you like use all of those tools and navigate it, so that we were actually assessing what they knew and not their ability to navigate the platform. So that was super important. And then also, we have 20% of our students with disabilities at Bachman. We have academic support, behavior support, and diagnostic kindergarten. And so we really worked hard to get accommodations on our students' IEPs to be able to have those accommodations on the WIDA. And I think that was also super important. So that's kind of the student level. And then the teacher level, really building that capacity, building that culture in the school, problem solving around it, giving support. My assistant principal, Dallin Miller, was really the driving force behind this for the last 3 years. And he just had a laser focus on ELD, and just making sure that we were grouping kids, that we were looking at the assessments, that we were making 7 to 8 week plans, that we, before WIDA, that we had a countdown to WIDA, that students were being prepared based on their specific needs to be able to make sure that they had the support they needed. So, and in the end, I think it's become a lot of collective efficacy for our teachers to be able to see that all of this hard work turned into huge growth, and really taking ownership of that. And then just really, again, like I said, having that district support, and we, all of us getting better at this, and all of us seeing the importance. And I think most importantly of all of the assessments we take, like, WIDA is the most important, because if our students don't exit, then they don't have access to higher learning in secondary and beyond. So it's been a really incredible journey, and super thankful for the colleagues and the support in every way to be able to do this. And I look forward to continuing this journey and seeing where this pandemic takes us, and in a lot of positive ways. So we'll see. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. So Heather's school, now that you know a little bit about the school and their student population, they actually have an average, so this is an average, 13% student of their students learning English, the multilingual learners, become proficient in English, 13%. So that's, you know, the highest, 7% higher than the state average. And because of the work that these principals have been doing, you know, the results are really clear. I'll just say one thing before we open to questions. You know, Michael Fullen said this really interesting thing about burnout. He said, burnout is the gap between how hard you work and the results you see. So the reason I use this is because somebody, and I can't remember which principal said it, but she did mention this kind of return on investment, which ends up being economic language that oftentimes only state legislators end up being compelled by. But this kind of language is important because, as Heather says, and all the other principals, you know, at the elementary school, when you don't focus on compliance and you look at individual student learning needs and you have collective efficacy, so much of the Hattie work they've already talked about, then the students and their families will, and their communities will have an economic future, right? So that's a really important piece. So let's open to questions. So when you ask the question, say specifically a school, and then that principal will respond, or otherwise the principals won't know who to respond. So I think, Brooke, you had a first question.
My question, I also typed it in the chat, and it looks like I also need, for myself, need the Fox program. There's an extra N in there. But I just was curious what other program besides Haggerty Sue was using.
Yeah, and so in our intervention, we use Spire. So we use Spire for that really intense phonics. And then tier 1 in K1, 2, we're using foundations, moving kids to that just tier 1 explicit. That's what we've been doing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brooke. So when you have a question, if you just start talking, but identify yourself, Brooke is from Granite. I know her from a really wonderful school, Moss Elementary. That's where I knew her from.
Christelle, this is Melinda and Cash. I'm with Robin. And I had a question about for the Escalante school. I was wondering if we could see their PLC template. A couple of them mentioned it and we liked how focused it was. We wondered if we could get a copy of that.
4 weeks cycle. So Cody, if you send it to me, right, then I'll send it out to everybody. So any of the requests from the, you know, from the participants to the principals, if you send everything to me, then when I send the link to the recording, then I'll add all those things. How does that work?
I had one more question for Mary Jackson School, and that was when they talked about working on the testing strategies and they had students read aloud passages and record themselves and listen to it. I wondered what they were using for that, if it was something online or if it was part of their Wonders curriculum.
I'll field that question, I guess. We had them recording on their iPads. The passage was a section of the story they read that week in the Wonders curriculum that we used. And then they had a comprehension question they needed to answer, and their recording they went back and listened to, and then that was turned into me. We just had them, I taught them very quickly to airdrop to my own iPad, so I had everything on one location. So it is a little bit of a convenience being a one-to-one school with that. And if I could just jump on that, something I thought of also, one of the testing strategies I forgot to mention was right before we were taking the test, before I started the official instructions, I just reminded students that this was an academic test. So when they were speaking, they needed to speak like they were speaking to a teacher. And when they were typing and writing, it wasn't like text messaging. "Cuz" was not a word they could use. So, but yes, that was done on their iPads using Wonders passages that they'd been working on that week.
Thanks, Katie. So I'll just say one thing related to that. You know, the data that I've been looking at, you have kids, their listening skills, you know, like they test it out, like it's the highest level on WIDA. The problem ends up being it doesn't connect. And then sometimes because of their high ability to listen without a clear purpose for why they're listening, which is, I'm referring to what Katie's saying. When they're reading, again, it's the whole thing about listening and reading is about comprehension. It's about understanding. And so providing a purpose for receptive language is the way in which expressive language, right, speaking and writing happen. That's why we don't get any bang for our buck and we look at the writing scores and they end up being terrible. Well, first of all, they're not really talking about what they've read or what they've listened to. You see how those things are connected? So Katie, thanks for saying that. Other questions?
Christelle, there's a question in the chat that I could address. It's from Michael Eldridge, Michelle Eldridge. It's talking about what we use for progress monitoring, and I think that is a real issue for all of us. We have not found a good progress monitoring that is specific to English learners. So something that my team and I have been working on for the last year, and now with elevations coming along, it's going to help us tremendously. What we've been focusing on is the can-do standards. So we're having teachers go in and look specifically in the domain that they're working on with those students and looking carefully at what can our kids do. And if they can do that, then our progress monitor is, well, now we're going to figure out how we can assess this next standard. And a lot of the conversation today, I think, was on supporting teachers in their professional learning and development and letting them make good decisions. And when they're in these PLCs, I have an opportunity to visit most of these schools and participate in them. I am just astounded at the thinking that goes on. So they will actually use these standards and they'll start talking about, well, how would you assess if a student can do that? And they solve their own issues. And it is really incredible to watch it happen because the capacity and the thinking and the collaboration. So you're right, progress monitoring is difficult, but we try to focus on, again, what's the benchmark? And the benchmark is that can-do standard. We want to move them to the next level of what they can do.
Thank you. We've done that as well. We actually turned all those into an editable document that teachers can go in and check in a sense and make notes on what they're, as evidence of what they're seeing. I'm getting the request from teachers. They want something a little more formal, especially because it's from spring to spring, to get that, to use that data. So I know WIDA suggests using the model. I just didn't know if anyone had started or had done that. So thank you, Peggy, for all of that. That's helpful.
Yeah, Michelle, I think, and thank you. Michelle has really shared a lot with me, and I appreciate all of that because Christelle will say, I'll ask her questions to go, hey, go talk to this person. So I appreciate there's many names here that have shared with me. So we're hopefully going to share ours. But you're right, that progress monitoring that teachers want. So another thing that we do try to focus teachers on is what is the golden ring that we're looking for, and it's content. So we're trying to say, well, how are they doing in the content? And then make sure that we're moving toward that because that's where we really want them to be able to show what they know. Of course, they have to in WIDA, and it is a different lens, but we really want them to be able to show what they know and then be able to access the content.
Thanks, Peggy. And I'll just say something about, not specifically about Michelle, but I do refer lots of people to Michelle because she's very skillful in helping schools actually understand how they should grade their funding for working on individual student learning needs. And so, she's a master at that. The other thing is, we wanted to schedule a time to talk to Spring Creek Elementary, which was an exemplary school. Their principal is really unbelievable, just like all the principals that you've heard. And so the combination of Michelle braiding funds and then having a school like Spring Creek with this amazing principal, is something that we want to schedule. And then the other one, and I don't know if she's on, but JM from Ogden, the kind of work that her superintendent is actually doing with budgeting is really focused on braiding funds and individual learning needs, which is a big theme in what the principals have said. Rich Nye, who's the superintendent, did a really great presentation on the way in which district funds are being allocated related to individual learning needs and how those funds are graded. So he gave a presentation to the board's EL task force. So I've asked him also, to work with us and provide an opportunity to see what he presented, which we would include JM as the, director for federal programs, and then their exemplary school, which is Odyssey. And I visited Odyssey quite a while ago. So that would be another really great opportunity to see how superintendent, budgeting, BA, allocations, grading, alignment of funding and resources related to the way in which they're using those resources. Both Ogden and Park City have the best summer school bridge programs ever. And on our playlist, we actually have presentations done by them. So I'll send that out again to remind you to look at that. Incredibly impressive. So other questions?
I have a question for teachers. So it sounds, we in our district, we have Wonders and Wonders EL, both as our support or our programs, foundation programs and support programs. We're having some difficulty at some of our schools with teachers embracing using the curriculum to support the needs of those students, and some difficulty with using those instead of teachers pay teachers or Pinterest for their help. So I'm interested to hear from principals, but also the teachers that shared. What has your, I guess knowing what I know about school reform, school improvement, and all those things, I'm guessing not every teacher is like, woohoo, we want to use these programs. So I just am curious to know, like, what would you say your takeaways would be for school leaders who are trying to help others see the benefit? I mean, I can talk evidence and research till I'm blue in the face, but I know that doesn't really matter to most people. So like teachers that are on here still, or even principals who've experienced like kind of helping that way. Okay, now I'll stop my question. Anybody?
I'll chime in on that. I'm big on talking today, apparently. I think for me, oh yes.
You have to actually say which school.
Oh, sorry, Katie from Mary Jackson. Sorry, okay. Mary Jackson. When I first started working with the ELD learners at our school, we were still using another program, the EL Achieve. And I felt that program was lacking a lot because everything was so far off base from our reading curriculum we were using in the gen ed classrooms with all of our students. And when I found out there was a Wonders ELD program, I was over the moon about it because finally something that aligned. And I've taken a few state trainings from WIDA when I first became ALS coordinator. And in talking to the presenters there, a question I always had was, what's the best ELD curriculum? And of all the people I talked to, no one could recommend, like there wasn't one end all be all program that was good. But one thing they did all agree on was that in the schools they specifically worked with outside of being a WIDA presenter, pre-teaching was the model they found to be most beneficial in math, in science, in all these other categories of education. So when I found out there was a program that specifically aligned with what we were using in our district and that I could use that to pre-teach, that was an incredible benefit. And I feel like that was where we did start to get the biggest bang for our buck as far as watching our children excel with their EL skills. They were able to look at the content, get the background knowledge, get the basic knowledge, because it is different from what they're seeing in Tier 1 instruction. But it prepared them more to be in that classroom. It wasn't going over their head. It wasn't being taught simultaneously so that, on the off chance that I saw them in my room for ELD, after they'd already seen it in their classroom, they were already kind of lost at that point. Whereas they went back into class, knowing that, hey, next week I'm going to know a lot of information on this story. And so I think that having the programs that align to each other is a huge benefit to our students. So I know that I was really thankful when that program came out, and I remember emailing Peggy a few times, asking like, could we be a pilot school? Could I get any sooner than anyone else? Because I was just like, this is what we need. This is what we need to push us over the top. And I believe last year was our first implementation year. And obviously it was the extra boost we need, because here we are with an excellence award, something we haven't seen in the past. So I feel like that's its big selling point for me, is that it aligns with reading, and that's what our kids need.
Okay, anyone else want to respond?
I will. I'm Katie's coworker at Mary Jackson, and I teach general ed. But I was teaching dual immersion last year, and I actually was a little bit resistant to have another pullout out of my classroom with like just being like, okay, so I really have 2.5 hours, but now you're taking another 45 minutes. And I think, and on a side note, I have been on a team with Katie for the past 4 years. So I was a little bit less resistant than other people because I know her skill level. But I think once I started seeing that my kids that had a hard time participating started participating in class, that was like a big thing for me of like, okay, like what she's doing is working. And so I'm more willing to be a part of this, because we did have a lot of stagnant kids, and it was frustrating to look at WIDA scores and then look at what they could do in the classroom. So I think just seeing how it was working in our classroom was probably the most effective, because I know I've also talked to other teachers who felt the same way after maybe a month or two into school.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Robin. So this goes back to the whole thing about being clear about seeing results. You know, so again, it's the gap between how hard you're working and the results you see. And as soon as you start seeing results for students that change what happens in your classroom, something actual, then it does make a difference. And so the way in which you think strategically about that is really important. That was my whole point about Park City. They saw their English learners, you know, their ACT scores for English learners at a 12 go up to like 22. Now, why was that? Well, because that summer bridge program prepared the students, just like the pre-teaching that Katie's talking about, for the kids to feel confident enough to go into an AP class and not feel less than. I mean, you realize the theme. I mean, one of the major themes here is about how do you build trusting relationships where you actually respect the expertise and the assets of what families and children bring, and then how do you engage students in monitoring their progress to motivate them and to be recognized for what they can do and what their goals are. Okay, so these are like key pieces. And the other thing too, I want to offer to anybody, if you want to email me general observations or general questions, then I'll actually send them to Peggy, and Peggy and her team can work on that together. So other questions before we kind of summarize?
I think just going back to Michelle's question about curriculums, I think when we got EL Achieve, I asked people to use it so that they would, I really wanted to make sure that they understood how to teach English language development and not learn it from Pinterest. And once they got familiar with it and they felt like they could use components of it, and then our ELD coaches from Peggy's department created these ELKs. They were essential language components. So they would kind of draw out of all of those lessons what the essential language components were, and kind of pairing that with the can-do standards. And teachers felt like they had a little bit more like substance to go off of that was not on Pinterest, right? but it was actually grounded in research and then also tapping into their expertise. So I really felt like at the beginning, it was really important that we did use a program so that we understood it, and then we could have a little bit more liberty. And then when Wonders came, again, like we were always felt like EL Achieve was so disconnected because we were reading about fossils in our regular tier 1 instruction, and then suddenly we're like talking about a day at the beach. And so just like I feel like alignment is something that was really missing, and that if we can teach it in a context that is meaningful and connects to our kids and taps into that cultural relevancy to our kids, and what we're learning was really super important. So it was kind of that shift in making it more accessible and more interesting for our kids and for our teachers to teach. So it was a little bit of that shift of like, let's do this, and then we'll have the skills to be able to do that.
Okay, so I just want to, I'm looking at the chat, and one of my absolute favorite principal colleagues is Brett from Ames. And he actually wrote something to everyone, and he says, we have used a math and English lab with small groups of students to pre-teach them for the upcoming lessons in the class with great success as well. So this is about creating conditions in safe environments for students to feel like they can contribute and they're confident learners, right? I mean, that's the premise of language acquisition. I mean, if we were all like in Russia and trying to learn academic content in Russian, we would be in that same situation. And that's the difference that people have continued to say. There's a difference between literacy and language acquisition, and you have to know how they support each other, right? So that's the key piece that I've learned. Does anybody want to say anything in relationship to any other pattern that they actually saw across the schools or what the principals said?
Just one thing I will add, because of our high ceiling with the University of Utah classes, we see students that go through our normal high school curriculum and don't need any support with languages, and then get into the University of Utah classes at 16 and 17 as sophomores, juniors, and seniors, where all of a sudden they're struggling with language issues they've never had, which is unique to them and unique to maybe this setting. But that's something that we end up adjusting to as well, that we just see it as the technical reading increases and the amount of volume that they have to read, the language and the interpretation issues become more critical.
Yeah, thanks, Brett, for putting that in. I think that's the other piece when we start looking at which you all can help us with. You know, that transition from elementary to middle and then middle to high school. Brett has one of the most amazing, I can't remember her name, but I was on a panel with her and she got a full scholarship to Berkeley, a refugee student. I can't remember her name, Brett, but she's like stunning. She's like a poet and an activist and brilliant.
Saida Dair.
Yes, yes. Yeah, so thank you so much. Any other last comments? There's lots of thank yous to Salt Lake and the principals in the chat. And remember, if you have other questions or you want to say anything in relationship to the work that they're doing or ask for their help, you can send it to me as kind of the central point, and then I'll send it to Peggy, and then they can work it out. If you want to do a follow-up, we can do that. I think our next one, I've invited Charlene Louie and her schools, because they actually had 5 schools of excellence, and then Monroe was an exemplary school. So this is kind of my thing. We learn from each other in Utah. We don't have to go other places. I mean, I've seen some of the best, absolute best instruction in my entire life, and I'm pretty old, and it's been in Utah classrooms. So I just want to thank each of you, your dedication, And remember, your open-hearted love for children and their families is the key. I mean, that's what Charlotte said about always examining her biases and her assumptions. Okay, let all that go, right? And just be, you know, awake to the surprises of learning every day. That's the point. Learn to love learning with each other and learn from each other, right? And with each other. We have a great network of people that are kind and generous and open-hearted and are just working so hard and producing the results, but being really strategic in how they align resources, align curriculum, use PLCs effectively, engage families, have students set their own learning goals, have teachers understand their goals. It's all about collective efficacy as a learning community. So it's really a privilege to work with all of you and learn with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Christelle.
You're welcome.